This is Robert Mardlanchi, the Mindshare Learning Report, Canada's Learning and Technology e-magazine, and welcome to This Week in Canadian EdTech. I'm honored to have join me for a Mindshare Learning Moment, Shawn Young, who is the co-founder and CEO of Classcraft, on the inspiration for becoming a B Corp and what's in store for the future. Thank you for joining me today, Shawn.
Thanks, Robert. Real pleasure. It's always exciting chatting with you.
Well, as one of Canada's most notable EdTech founders, Shawn Young, a little bit about Shawn. He is a co-founder and CEO, as I mentioned, an innovative Classcraft is an innovative platform that motivates students using the culture and mechanics of games. Since its launch, Classcraft have gained incredible traction with educators around the world, providing tools to transform behavior and classroom cultures. Shawn is a past educator. He taught 11th grade physics for 9 years, holds a bachelor's degree in physics, master's degree in education from the University of Sherbrooke, and is also a seasoned web developer. Shawn is co-chair of UNESCO's MGIEP Global Collective for Cell and Digital Learning, is president of EdTech Association in Quebec, is an ambassador for the education faculty at the University of Sherbrooke. You've been a busy man, Shawn. Congratulations on all that you do, and he's interested in creating community in the classroom and how playful principles can help teach the whole child. Uh,
Thanks.
wow, what a journey it's been. How many years now for Classcraft?
Well, Classcraft turned 8 in November. So since founding, I started in my classroom. I was a teacher for 10 years. So has a pre-inception before that date. I would say, Classcraft passed the 10-year milestone of as a concept, but as a company, it's 8 years old. Yep.
And you aren't not just any company, you're a B Corp. Perhaps you can share a little bit about what that entails. And we're an incorporated company here, but the B Corp moniker, I think, resonates pretty well for you, no doubt, in education.
Yeah, I mean, so for everybody listening, B Corp is a certification that is relatively stringent, and you need to recertify on a regular basis. And it's an independent body that assesses companies for ethics and ethical practices around different elements, things like environment, governance, diversity, employee conditions, contributing to the community, impact, these types of things. So some of the more famous B Corps are companies like Patagonia that have been leading the way for decades in terms of impact, organizational impact. And so, surprisingly, there aren't that many ed tech companies that are B Corps. I thought when we're going to do it, there's like a listing of all the B Corps. You can find it online, and thought we would
Right.
find a lot of ed tech companies, and surprisingly, not that many. But it just makes sense, right? Ed tech companies, by definition, are impact companies. And there's
100%.
there's no ed tech company trying to do bad for kids, that I know of anyway.
Right. No,
So,
absolutely.
so
No,
it's a
and
fit for sure,
right.
but surprisingly not that spread out. I would have expected a lot more ed tech companies to be B Corps.
My former chair of our EdTech program at Pepperdine University described me once as a social entrepreneur.
Mm.
Is that part of the B Corp kind of
Yeah, it's definitely that mindset. I mean, what's different with self-declaring or being a social entrepreneur is that there's an accountability piece to being a B Corp. When you're a B Corp, you have to change your letters of incorporation to
mm,
include, for example, the standard language in Canada for a company is like the directors are beholden to the shareholders to blah 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 blah. But for B Corps, it's shareholders and stakeholders. And so there's a responsibility at the board of directors level to make good decisions for the users, for the community, for all the different stakeholders that are part of who you're working with the company. And so there's there's not only an intent, but there's also a requirement to think that way. And the fact that the certification touches on so many points is,
Hmm.
and it's pretty hard to get. What it does is also pushes you to develop other elements. So, for an example, when we got certified, it was pretty uh, easy for us to make a case about the impact we're having on the community and on kids
Right,
and all of that. But we weren't necessarily that environmentally focused. I mean, we're a software company. It's not like we're mining rare metals or whatever. Like
right,
the environmental impact is pretty low, but and yet we because that's part of the criteria, and because we care about being a B Corp, it pushed us to say, well, what could we do? And so we've got um, last year was the first year we were carbon neutral. So we've it's a pretty cool program. We collaborated with um, an advocacy group with kids, and they teach kids in schools how to reduce their carbon footprint, and the kids measure the reduction in carbon footprint that they've made, and those are the carbon credits you buy back to offset your carbon footprint.
oh
So at the same
cool,
time as it's like educational, we're supporting the city educational initiative, we're also buying back our carbon through um, prevention of emissions. And so that's not, of course we care about the environment, but that's not necessarily something we would have perhaps
right,
done right away if we hadn't been a B Corp. So
right.
it holds you accountable.
For sure. And of course, speaking of carbon footprint, now, as you were saying off air earlier, that most of your team you're now remote, so that has a greater impact. And when you consider some of the positives that came out of COVID, reducing their carbon footprints around the world has been a phenomenal impact, and some of it will continue, like your organization.
Totally. I mean, I think that for us, we started Classcraft because we wanted to have a positive impact on education and students and the way they relate to school, and that mission is just as relevant now as it always was. um, but we were just talking about this before we got on, Robert, right? Like companies now, we're seeing it with how they respond to current events. For example, the conflict in Ukraine and how a lot of companies are taking a stance. I think we're in an age where um, it is becoming more and more clear for companies that they are a moral entity, and that they do have responsibilities to the communities that they serve. And if and whether they whether how no regardless of how genuine that is, social media is definitely holding a lot of more companies accountable to those types of standards. And so it's I think that we're in an age where the staff and people working in companies want to work for companies that have a social mission, and I think that consumers want to buy from companies that have a social mission as well. And so that's all good things. Those are good trends, I think, for society at large.
For sure, and I love the notion. I just pulled up your website. Relationships are everything. You really it really resonates with the external visitor that you're all about impact, and
Mm.
kudos to you for that. So talk to me about how it helps shape your product offering in being a B Corp.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, it's all about the why, right? Classcraft is at the confluence of two, like it's a Venn diagram of behavior intervention. So, classroom management, PBIS, MTS, social emotional learning, these types of initiatives that are core to schools running really well, and driving student motivation. And that's the whole like gaming aspect of Classcraft. And those two things
Right.
together are the how. That's that we're accomplishing our mission. But our mission ultimately is to make school a, you know, meaningful place for students by fostering better relationships. And when I started Classcraft, that's why I made it. You know, my kids were already engaged. They didn't need more of that. I was
Hmm.
building, you know, we were building hot air balloons and all kinds of cool stuff in the
Cool.
classroom. But they didn't have meaningful relationships between each other. Like I had students that
Mm.
were seniors in high school. I could pick any student in my class, and they wouldn't be able to name everybody in the class, even though they'd been in the same school for 5 years. And so for me, that was appalling. I'm like, why aren't you guys helping each other with this? Is physics class. It's a hard
Right.
class. Why aren't you helping each other? Why aren't you collaborating? Like, I'm not going to call
Interesting.
you cheaters if you help each other on your homework. Like, why
Right.
isn't that level of collaboration core to your experience? Because fundamentally, school is a social experience, and we've seen it this year, right? In the past year, like
Hmm.
we can learn everything we need to learn off of Wikipedia. So what's the plus value of going back to brick and mortar? And the reason is relationships. And so Classcraft is an approach that is fundamentally helping teachers, schools, students develop more positive relationships between each other, and you know, in all of those parts of that, you know, triangle. And we're really committed to doing that, because ultimately, if you don't have positive relationships in schools, um, you're not going to get much done.
Right.
You know, we put a lot of stake in curriculum and a lot of stake in a lot of different elements of school, but the reality is that the foundation of it is based in developing deep relationships. So, you know, of course, the that ties all the way back to our mission in the B Corp, because we genuinely are striving to have a social impact in schools more than, you know, these are important things to do, but we're not interested in, you know, making certain processes, you know, optimizing whatever process in a
Right.
school. We're all about making the relationships, the human relationships, more meaningful.
It's interesting you talk about that because being in a co-working innovation space, the value is the secret sauce. I'd like to say is it's about people and community, and nurturing that community and making you know kids or we focus on the future work and learning here. We have work integrated learning, co-op students, interns from universities and colleges. So it's when you feel like you're part of something bigger and you're co-working and co-learning together, that's very powerful, right? I recall Ryerson taking exception to students collaborating a few years back. It might even be a decade now that they were sharing
Yeah, yeah,
their notes. Remember that?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
that's that train has left the station a long time ago now, and it's really about now what is the role of the teacher and how and a professor and what's the value add, because you always it's not it's more we talk about the guide on the side, not stage on the stage anymore. But I interviewed architect yesterday, and I highly recommend you check that out on
Mm,
our report today. And they released a new ebook, which is a multimedia journal called Wise, and we were actually featured in it along with U of T. They're building a new building in Scarborough, and the classroom is like an octagon shape, and the professor is in the center, and you have all these LCD panels around the ceiling tilted down, and it's just such a cool environment, but it brings you closer together
mhm,
versus
mhm.
the straight row tiered theater seating.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the whole evolution that we're seeing, and let's face it, we're at the forefront of it, you and I and other ed techs, and our challenge is, as Dr. Steve Jordan's from U of T talked about, the psychologist, avoiding the great snapback. We made great leaps
Mhm.
forward because of the pandemic. Innovation was, you know, the mother of invention, right, and a necessity. And now, how do we continue to push forward? And how, how have you? What have you experienced in that regard as a company?
It's interesting, I think we're because we're so focused on behavior intervention as like one of the two pieces, like I was saying earlier. Of course, during the pandemic, people were super interested in Classcraft because they needed to find ways to motivate kids, and Classcraft has a whole an incredibly and surprisingly robust engine around fostering the different factors that drive intrinsic motivation. And of course, we saw it through virtual learning. It was such a challenge to just get kids to show up on Zoom and do their work. And so, but ultimately, where we really shine is around teaching kids through a behavior based approach, teaching them the skills that they need to be better learners. And I've been saying it, since March 2020. I've been saying, there's going to be a behavior crisis as soon as these kids come back to school, because, and this was in March. So I'm like, when I said that, I was expecting us to come back in September. I didn't know it'd be this long, but when I'm like, watch, like this will have been 5 months with no school. Like these kids are gonna not. They're gonna be really hard to control. Like teachers are trying to control them,
Right.
and you know, and then in America, it continued for well over a year and a half, and we've seen it this school year. Like we have one of our, they're now a client of ours, but they shut down for 2 weeks in October, not because there's too many COVID cases, because the behavior was out of control, and they just did a
Wow.
global reset of like they sent all the kids home because it makes sense. Take a middle schooler,
Right.
leave them to their own devices for a year and a half, and then overnight you're like, okay, you're coming back to school. Shut up, sit down, raise your hand, and do what I tell you. Like, of course that's not going to work.
Yeah. No. And
So
straight row desks, right? Like back
yeah,
to the
yeah,
old
yeah,
model. Yeah.
exactly.
Not
So
too inspiring.
right, and so we're now seeing that it's later than I had thought, because we didn't come back as soon as I thought, but we're seeing it come to bear now, where schools have mental health challenges, they have behavioral challenges, they all now have mandates in the US anyways to teach social emotional learning, and do that and measure it. 211 laws were passed in 2021 at the state level in America alone,
Wow. And
asking
that's
and mandating
yeah.
schools and districts to measure and teach social emotional learning
And
and
that's
student
and that's
behavior.
your wheelhouse, isn't it? I mean, that's been your
Exactly.
focus. So kudos to you for being at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, feel like there's gratitude there on our side, but also, when you're trying to solve real issues in education, um, and doing that in a high quality, committed way, you'll end up at the right place in the right time as well. So, but you're right. I mean, I wish we didn't have these behavioral problems. Honestly, like it's a bad problem to have.
Yeah.
But it also means that the work that we're doing is important.
Well, kudos to you for all that you do. And so, what's in store for 2022? You have part of your commitment. You're launching a new advisory board. I understand.
Yeah, so we've had our inaugural meeting, so it exists already, but we're announcing it in the upcoming weeks. We have we over the last year, I would say, have really realized just how important the work we're doing is for diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the biggest single gaps for minority students is around behavior intervention. Boys will get 2 to 1 number of suspensions versus girls. African American students 2 to 1. Students on
Mm.
IDA plans 2 to 1. There's real disproportionality in how we're intervening with these kids, and so Classcraft's approach of reinforcing positive behaviors coupled with the insights that we can get from the data to hold, to help school districts hold their teachers and themselves accountable is really important work. And, you know, I, I'm, I'm a cis white male, hetero male. So, I'm very cognizant that, although we have, the research and the approach and the vision for how we can impact this specific issue, I feel like it was important to bring in seasoned educators that had worked on this for decades. Really quite excited to announce who they are, but to just bring that to the forefront and help us understand what are those issues and how our bias is coming to play and how we've developed Classcraft and how can we reduce that. And so in essence, helping us do this work in the most meaningful way with the most respect as well for these communities as it's possible. So it's important, and we're lucky to have people who believe sufficiently enough in our mission that they want to get involved.
Well, I admire and kudos for that, and for taking the leadership. We've had a board for it's our 20th anniversary this year of MindShare, believe it or not. We go back. I think we go back as early as you started, and same holds true with D2L. I mean, I first met John Baker, another legendary EdTech co-founder and CEO of a Canadian company, D2L, 20 years ago plus. And, having a board of advisors that help shape your direction who will have a pulse for the market. So on the business side, we had business related leaders and education folks as well. And you being an educator, in my estimation, is really part of your success story, because I've
Hmm.
seen so many CEOs who are passionate about education but don't have that pedagogical expertise, and that I think that unless you make up for that shortcoming, you spin your wheels, right? You do a lot of guesswork, I think, and so kudos to you for taking that leap of faith, to join the dark side, as some people would say, from being an educator to a corporate, but you're a B Corp. So that's something that is a real differentiator for you.
Hmm.
And I appreciate you taking the time to talk about that today. And any final thoughts to share as we prepare to wrap this up and get
No, I mean,
more
thanks
chatting
for
today?
saying for the kind words. I really appreciate it. I mean, I think you're right. There's a surprisingly small number of ed tech companies who've been started by educators, but they exist, and I
Hmm.
agree that there's Paper's another good example. There's a lot in Quebec. I'm
Yeah, you're in
president of
good
the ed tech.
company, and I was going to say, and your commitment to the sector, being president of EdTech Quebec, is says a lot about you, and hence we're really keen to host I think it's our 13th Canadian EdTech Summit next year
Uh-oh,
at
you maybe
McGill.
need to skip to 14.
Yeah, so
At
so
McGill,
we'll
that's great, Robert.
yeah, so we're considering, so we're in discussions, and that's where we hope to be, and it would be great to have you and Phil Cutler as well. Phil won our startup challenge 5 years ago. We had him down at FETC, reflecting on that, where he originally had a kiosk he won as a result of winning our startup challenge at FETC, and then became 5 years later one of the lead sponsors. So, a great Quebec company, and also a pedagogical, knowledgeable teacher who started an edtech company. So I
Yeah.
don't know what it is about Quebec, but you really nurture, entrepreneurship and education, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's we've got over 100 or organizations that are part of the
Really?
association.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
100
amazing.
members at tech.ca, but of different sizes, big and small, but
Sure.
a surprising large number are educator founded versus when you look at like the proportion, for example, in the US. But yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, there's a mix of like, there's a lot of tech savvy in Quebec, of course. There's also because it's its own special education system, maybe there's
Hmm.
more of a need to build your own stuff, perhaps. But yeah, we've got a pretty vibrant ecosystem, and I'm pretty proud of the work we've done with the association, because it's all been about um, creating opportunities for ed tech companies to collaborate and drive synergies. I think we're being an ed tech entrepreneur is not easy. I would say it's one of the hardest verticals to be in, and being able to create a peer based support system like an association like that is it was extremely important for me and the founding members, and I'm really glad that we're 5 years later, and past 100 members, and
Exciting.
yeah, it's important stuff. And I think that a lot of us are non-competitive in education. We're trying to solve different problems, and there's
Right.
actually a lot of potential for partnerships, and I think that's been core to Classcraft's success. One of our big partners is Canvas,
Yeah.
and core to the success of this association. So, anyways, thanks for having me, Robert. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Shawn Young, CEO of Classcraft. My name is Robert Merlanchi, the Mindshare Learning Report. Be sure to check out www.mindshare.learning to get your latest issue. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.
Thank you.